Thanks for joining us today for this webinar, Technical Workflows for Managing OS Upgrades. I'm Mark Buffington. I'm a Technical Relationship Manager for our Global Business Development team and also a member of our internal Technical Training Enablement team here at Jamf. Through this webinar, we'll go through a number of topics. Firstly, preparing for new OS versions. We'll look at how to delay upgrades and updates if needed in your environment. And then we can look at options to choose the upgrade path that's best for you. And we'll also look at additional considerations, especially as we look to potentially a remote employee or user base that you're supporting through this upgrade time. First, a Jamf overview. Here at Jamf, we're here to help organizations succeed with Apple. And we do this through a number of products in our portfolio. Our portfolio of enterprise-grade solutions is ready to help you tackle authentication, device management, and endpoint protection challenges in the Apple ecosystem. And underpinning it all is Jamf Nation, the world's largest community of Apple administrators, with more than 100,000 of your fellow admins on the site ready to help you connect, learn, and grow. In today's session, we're going to be focused primarily in the device management layer of our portfolio, with some specific examples for Jamf Pro. Jamf helps more than 40,000 organizations manage more than 17 million Apple devices and counting. When the enterprise needs the world leader in Apple management, they turn to Jamf. The world's largest banks, tech companies, most valuable brands, and largest companies choose Jamf for Apple management. And finally, we have an exclusive focus on Apple and a history of providing same-day support for their new operating systems and services. This ensures that users can take advantage of new Apple capabilities the day they are available. Here, you can see our track record, and we're more than excited to add Big Sur to this slide as soon as it is released from Apple. So that brings us to the question. It's October, new OS versions are here. Are you ready? Are you ready to deploy the new OSs in your environment? How do you get there? So let's take a step back and look at ways to prepare. Firstly, it's worth noting that OS upgrades occur year-round. It's not just something that follows WWDC each year, but throughout the year, there's different changes to macOS, iOS, tvOS, and these changes are documented for IT administrators through Apple's Apple Seed for IT program, which allows you to receive beta access, unique release notes, and an avenue to provide feedback to Apple in a pre-release format. If you're not already a member of Apple Seed for IT, I strongly recommend contacting Apple for any support, but it's worth noting that you can use your managed Apple ID from Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager to enroll into the program. Going along with Apple's betas are Jamf's beta programs. On Jamf Nation, we have our Jamf Pro beta programs and forums where you can receive early access to Jamf Pro betas. And we also have Jamf School beta access within the product as well. Highly encourage you to file feedback to both Apple and Jamf early and often. And staying informed through these avenues tends to be the best way to prepare to know when you're ready to run certain updates and upgrades. From a higher level summary from Apple, it's also worth noting that they've had a number of presentations that are specific to enterprise IT needs. At WWDC this year, there was an entire enterprise IT and apps session track with a lot of great content. And we also had an update from Apple at JNUC 2020 this year with the session deploying macOS Big Sur. A lot of the content in that session is similar to what's in WWDC's sessions, but with some newer updates. So if you haven't seen this session yet, I strongly encourage the audience here to view it from our website, and you can use that QR code, scan it with your camera to get there. So you've gone through your testing, or maybe you didn't have time carved out in your schedule to do that. And at this point, maybe you've realized that maybe you're not ready to upgrade. That's okay. Let's look at some options to, say, pump the brakes, so to speak, to slow down and make it so the upgrades are going to happen at a pace that matches what's needed for your users and your tool sets that you have in your environment. Starting with recent releases of macOS, major upgrade installers can now be presented for download within system preferences, even showing an alert badge that is showing that there's something new and available for OS updates. A user, when Big Sur is released, they may see something like this on their computer, and if upgrading too early is going to cause issues in your environment, it's best to make sure that your users don't see a screen like this, especially if you're also blocking installers in additional ways. You ultimately want to reduce help desk tickets and help the users with the operating system that they're using currently. So to address that, we can look at deferral options and the deferred updates restriction. This is a restriction that's set via a configuration profile, and it can be deployed deferring updates for up to 90 days from the date that Apple has released that OS version. If applied to a system, the device won't advertise or show available updates in the Settings app on iOS or within System Preferences and the Software Update pane. New to macOS 10.15.4 or greater is that major OS releases, like we saw on the last screen, can also be deferred this way as well with this restriction. Looking at it within the Jamf Pro interface, here's what the restriction looks like for a macOS configuration profile, which this is also very similar to the same restrictions payload for iOS or tvOS devices. On macOS, there are also other ways to prevent system preferences and the software update framework from advertising new major releases. Instead of using a profile, the software update binary on macOS can be instructed to ignore specific updates by name. This is done using the command line interface on macOS, specifically ignoring an available update. On this example, I've got the software update command -- ignore and the name macOS Big Sur. I did put an asterisk there because there is something that this command is very case sensitive, and it needs to be the name of the published release from Apple's software update catalog. Additionally, if you're running older versions of macOS, High Sierra, and Mojave, they should be on a recent version of the patched updates or security updates in order to respect this ignoring of a major release through software updates. Let's take a look at how that would be applied using Jamf Pro. In this example, I'm using a policy with the files and processes payload, telling it to execute a one-line command as root. Once that's applied, that computer is going to ignore the update through the software update mechanisms. But what if your users are administrators and you want to block the macOS installer from being ran even if they acquire it on their own means? What would you do then? This is where restricted software records in Jamf Pro can be very powerful, as these allow an organization to fully block any macOS installer from running, as defined by specific known processes. OS installer applications generally follow similar naming conventions, but how would you know what an unreleased OS version's installer is titled? What if the user renamed the installer app and tried to run it? Ultimately, the most assured method of blocking the installer is to block the install assistant process, which is the part of the macOS installer that launches graphically when someone double-clicks the app. This process name is the same throughout different macOS versions, so blocking it would also prevent someone from updating from Mojave to Catalina, for example, unless you make the OS installer available on demand in self-service. We'll take a look at those options a little later on. Here's an example of a restricted software record in Jamf Pro. The install assistant process is defined, and if I scroll down in the record, additional items can be set for this restriction. Options to delete the application or notify IT administrators when the installer is launched can also be defined here. Yet, probably the most important part of a restriction like this is the messaging to users. Why did the installer just quit on them? Who should they talk to if they have a business reason to run a new macOS version before it's generally available within their organization? Communication is key here for a good end user experience and a good experience for your help desk staff as well. Okay, let's look at this from the flip side. You've done your testing, you've tested your applications that they work with the new macOS versions, and everything is set good to go. Once you're at this stage, we can look at options available, methods to automate the upgrade process, all while looking at the user experience considerations for the different methods you may choose. Speaking of user experience and considerations, let's look at the high-level view of how you can manage this. Firstly, ask the question, do you need to curate the process? Is this something that needs to be managed, or simply allow people to do it at their own will? How do you target upgrade-ready devices? If you're upgrading on your network, are you leveraging caching servers? That can significantly reduce the bandwidth and speed up the download process for the endpoints that you're updating. And then, should upgrades be on demand or pushed? That's something especially for macOS. You can manage that upgrade experience using Jamf tools and things like self-service. Starting out here, let's look at a first option. Let's start simple. Do nothing. For some of you, this may be a viable option, and it's by far the simplest. Users can be notified on their devices about updates, just as we would on our personal Apple devices, then follow the normal upgrade processes. If you have additional items that need to be targeted to devices running the new macOS version, leverage inventory-based smart groups to get those new profiles pushed out to them as well. But eventually, you'll want your fleet upgraded to the latest OS versions, not only for consistency of supporting your organization's devices and standardizing the OS versions, but rather for security reasons. Even though there are security updates published for older OS versions, the general principle is that the latest version of an OS is going to be the most secure, and that's the best security posture to take with your device fleet. Moving beyond doing nothing, if you're going to manage the upgrade process, you're going to need to decide how to target devices for an upgrade. Thankfully, within Jamf Pro, you have a wealth of inventory-based methods to check this using smart groups or advanced searches. You may be searching for and checking model identifiers for compatibility. Available storage space is a group of devices used by a certain team, group, or other attributes that's known about who's using the devices. Different teams may get updates at a different pace. And with all of these options, it is something that you may also have looking at compatibility of applications on the device as well. So for example, if you have a VPN client on macOS, for example, that's moving from legacy kernel extensions to system extensions, you may want to also incorporate the presence of the newer version for your target group. Once you have your target group set, let's start with upgrades for iOS, iPadOS, and tvOS. This is going to be upgrading using an MDM command, and as there is no agent on these operating systems, it's going to be a relatively straightforward method to do an upgrade. This is done as an individual device command or by a mass action. It's also worth noting that the MDM command to upgrade, it can override deferral restrictions. So that same restriction that I mentioned earlier about delaying and deferring available updates, that restriction can still be in place, and this will essentially override that. With iOS and tvOS, you can specify a specific available release as well. And it is worth noting that if a device is locked by a passcode, an automatic upgrade can't occur without either clearing that passcode or having the device unlocked first. So let's take a look at what that looks like. I have iOS upgrade search here in my mobile devices section. I'll view the members of it, and I'm going to choose the action button in the lower right. I'll select send remote commands, and then choose the update OS version on supervised devices. And from here, I have a number of options to specify iOS or tvOS, a specific version or the latest version, and then choose to either download only or download and install. And great, the command has been sent and devices are going to check in and start this process. Similarly, macOS does also support upgrades by an MDM command. This requires automated device enrollment or supervision. Again, like iOS, it can override deferral restrictions, and macOS will check for available updates and attempt to run them. When this happens, the users are going to be prompted with a notification center message stating that a software update is required by an administrator, and they will be prompted to restart to make that action take place. So users do need to click that button. And with the options that are available with Jamf Pro, we see this as a less commonly used method for upgrading macOS, but certainly may be an option as well. Looking at the most common way to upgrade macOS in Jamf Pro is going to be a variation of what you see on this screen here and what we'll walk through the rest of these examples. The workflow can be simplified in two basic steps. Get the macOS installer onto the computer and trigger the install using the startosinstall framework. Other functions of Jamf Pro specifically can help automate this, such as using smart groups to track progress, scope the right policies to initiate the install, and then customize and curate that user experience in self-service. Before we dive deeper into those individual steps, let's take a look at what this looks like from a high level within Jamf Pro, and then we can work backwards as to how it's set. Here, I have two policies created for Big Sur upgrades. One to place the installer on target computers, and I have my target group that I've created earlier. In the policy, it's going to do several things. It's going to place the installer application in the system, update the inventory to update other smart groups, and send a custom message letting users know that the upgrade is available. My actual upgrade policy is going to be published to self-service, and because of that inventory update, these target devices are going to be a member of that smart group that the installer is already cached and present. This particular policy is going to be at the most basic level. I'm simply doing a one-line command to trigger the installation to take place. From a user experience, once this policy is scoped to them, they'll see it in self-service. And additionally, you can add custom messaging that they're going to see as they run the policy. And while this is a very basic example of the built-in policy framework from Jamf Pro, you may choose to customize the experience even more by scripting to other messaging frameworks like Jamf Helper, for example, to further curate that user experience. Okay, if we're going to walk through this workflow, let's start with acquiring a macOS installer. There's two approaches to this. You can either push a full installer from your Jamf Pro file distribution points, or you can instruct computers to download the installer directly from Apple. Let's look at the first option to deliver the full installer from Jamf Pro first, which can leverage your existing distribution points when installing to computers. We'll need that installer application first, and we can take a look at ways to get it. An installer can be downloaded from Apple a number of ways, from either the App Store or that software update system preference pane are two common methods. There are also scripted methods that are shared among the Mac admins community to help automate these downloads too. Another download option is specific to computers running macOS Catalina. In this method, the software update binary can be instructed to download full installers with the software update fetch full installer command. On its most basic use, this command will download the most current macOS installers to the applications folder on the computer you run it. There's also a full installer version flag that you can view from the man page of software update, and that can also allow you to specify a specific macOS version to download. And this may be a good option when getting a macOS Big Sur installer once it's released. Once we have an installer downloaded, it does need to be prepared for delivery by a Jamf Pro policy. And in this example, we're going to use Jamf Composer to place it within a DMG or disk image. We'll walk through it here. For those that are unfamiliar with Composer, you can simply drag and drop the installer into the sidebar. Once it gets processed, it's going to present the file path where it's going to put the installer itself when you deliver it through a Jamf Pro policy. So here, it's going to deliver to the applications folder. While you may be used to building PKG files, we're going to build as a DMG or disk image. And this is important with macOS Big Sur specifically. Apple has announced changes to Big Sur where the OS is delivered on a read-only signed system volume. And that makes for a pretty big file that the normal package building frameworks on macOS and Composer can't do a native package creation through traditional means. So simply building as a disk image, I can then add this disk image file to a policy in Jamf Pro and scope that to the desired devices to deliver it to them as well. For more information on uploading packages to distribution points and creating a policy, you can check out the Jamf Online Training Catalog and some other sessions we have there. And if you don't want to prepare and upload an installer and distribute it on your own, there are other ways your Macs can be instructed to download the installer. You could do a scripted method. You could even leverage that software update command as a script to download onto your target clients. Volume purchasing options, formerly VPP, with Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager can also be used. And for either of these methods, if the upgrades are done on your managed network, consider using a macOS caching server to speed up the delivery. If delivering through volume purchasing, macOS installers of currently shipping versions are available through Apple School Manager and Apple Business Manager. Here I'm in Apple School Manager preparing to purchase macOS Catalina for my organization. There's a couple of things to note when instructing devices to grab an installer this way. You'll target and scope the OS to devices as a Mac App Store app within Jamf Pro using the licenses previously purchased. Once downloaded, however, installers delivered this way will install what's called a stub installer, which is usually around 20 megabytes or so. Of course, it doesn't have all the files in it, but it does contain the startosinstall install framework required to programmatically start an OS upgrade. Also, if you're delivering the installer this way, it's worth noting that, at least with Catalina installers, the install application will launch when the download is complete. If you'd rather have a Jamf policy trigger the install, consider using a restricted software record to block the graphical installer, as we outlined earlier on. Let's track the progress here. At this point, we've looked at a number of ways to stage the installer. And once it's present on your target computers, how do you automate and target the actual install command? This is where inventory data in Jamf Pro can be used to scope your install policy only to computers that have the installer already downloaded and are a member of the original upgrade target group, as you can see in this screenshot. Once a device meets this criteria, they should enter the scope of your upgrade policy. Speaking of the upgrade policy, I've referred to it a number of times throughout the presentation about this startosinstall command. This is the application binary embedded into modern macOS installers, and with it, OS upgrades and even erase it installs can be programmatically targeted using the macOS command line or Jamf policies. To view the options, you need to enter the path to your installer app /contents/resources/startosinstall. And in this example, I'm adding the usage flag, which will print out the different options that are available with this command. At its most simplest level, an upgrade can be done using the agree to license flag, so users are not prompted to agree to the new OS licenses as well. Looking at this, if we were to do the upgrade in this most basic self-service policy, again, we can run a Jamf policy with the files and processes payload executing this single one-line command, as shown here. But what if you want to add additional logic? Do you want to check for the power level and the power adapter status? Would you like to have an additional, just double check that there's enough free space on the drive? Maybe something changed since the last inventory update. Is the user on the computer a standard account with File Vault enabled? In that case, an authenticated reboot with File Vault may need to be added to your workflow. Would you like additional screens and full screen Jamf helper messages, additional user notifications? There's a lot of different attributes that are often shared on some maintained scripts that many of our users share on Jamf Nation and beyond, with the similar principles are likely going to apply when installing macOS Big Sur once it's generally released. And while iOS and tvOS upgrades are relatively straightforward, the macOS upgrade process, as I mentioned, can be a lot more nuanced per different environments and the upgrade workflow and experience you want to enable. Also, macOS 11 Big Sur is still in beta, and there's still time to test, and there still may be other attributes that we need to look at when managing these updates. You'll note that I didn't call out a specific GitHub link for specific upgrade scripts, as we can't say with certainty whether there will be other important details when it comes to Big Sur. And every year, this webinar topic receives a lot of great, nuanced questions, so we do intend on publishing an additional FAQ blog post regarding macOS upgrades after Big Sur is generally available, hoping to get a lot more information in your hands at that point. So please stay tuned and keep testing. One thing to note as well with any time doing upgrades is Apple's documentation. Here I have linked to the specific support article for installing macOS at your organization. And in addition to things like the MDM guide for IT, the deployment references, Apple has a lot of great documentation that you can expect to have updates when Big Sur is released. This page specifically calls out using startosinstall, as well as ensuring that you have an internet connection when you run a macOS upgrade. Even if you do install and stage that entire macOS installer application, if you're running a modern Mac with a T1 or T2 coprocessor, there's likely going to be firmware upgrades that are also required and personalization when that upgrade completes. So, to recap, stay informed regarding betas and testing. If that's not part of your daily, monthly, annual workflows at this point, please make it so, and surprises won't come up at you. You can defer or block OS updates if needed. Use MDM commands to install on iOS and tvOS devices. And leverage the power of inventory-based smart groups when it comes to automating both the delivery of installers as well as the actual install policy when you're working on macOS. And most importantly, plan a desired end user experience, and you can work backwards from there using the tools that are available. What other resources do we have? Here at Jamf, we offer a variety of services, training, and our world-class support to help you be successful. We're here to help. So don't hesitate to reach out to us with questions. And of course, we're nothing without you, our customers, and that's proven through the Jamf Nation community. This online forum is home to over 100,000 Apple IT-focused individuals that learn from each other, discuss best practices, and have access to a wealth of resources. Create a free account today to join the discussion if you're not there already. Thank you for listening. We'll email this recording out when it's ready. Scan that code if you have more questions regarding Jamf, or email us directly at info@jamf.com to get answers.